Hello, everyone, and welcome. I am James Love. I'm the Chief Product Officer here at Aptem. Thank you for being here. Whether you're a current Aptem customer or you're just exploring what we're about, this session is for you. It is not a product demo. It is ultimately a working session. Here's what I want you to leave with. Not a list of AI tools to try, not a sense that you need to move faster, something more useful than that. A repeatable method for turning what we should do with AI into something you can actually practice forwards. Use a disciplined, defensible strategy, one that improves how your organization absorbs cost, manages risk, and protects quality. That's it. One method, usable today. We've got 45 minutes or so, and I'm going to be using Slido throughout today's session to make it a little more interactive. So when you get the link that will appear shortly, please keep it open alongside this window or on your mobile phone. As I mentioned already, I will leave some minutes at the end for us to answer some questions. Please put those questions in the Q&A channel on the top right-hand corner of your screen. So first up, I'd like you to join via Slido. We'll spend a few minutes here so everyone can get up and involved. You can either scan the QR code using your phone, or you can go to slido.com and enter the ID available there after the hash number. The first question to be asked is, right now, what's your biggest operational squeeze? What's the thing that's impacting your businesses significantly and driving a lot of challenge or change for you? Unsurprising, we see for the first few respondents that tutor admin burden is appearing high up on that list. Interesting. Anyone going to knock off the admin burden? We've got off the job tracking and evidencing sort of racing up a little bit ahead of the others, but still the majority of you seem to be on admin burden. Well, the votes can still continue to come in. I'll carry on talking a little bit. It's not at all surprising that we're going to see that admin burden and off the job tracking and evidencing top of that list. There are actually some things that we're probably going to cover a little bit today in terms of where you really can build your strategy around solving for those problems and how AI can help alongside. So let's start with the reality that you're all already living. Funding bans have been locked for years, while every other cost you carry has gone up year on year. Staff, systems, compliance overhead are all rising well beyond what the funding model anticipated. And that's not a temporary squeeze. That's a structural gap that gets wider every year. Achievement rates have improved. 64.5% in the most recent published data for 23-24. Obviously, that's the last full set of data we have available, and it's the single biggest jump we've seen since standards were introduced. But that still means that roughly 4 in 10 apprenticeships don't complete. And for every non-completion, there's a cost to the learner, to the employer, and to you. Audit scrutiny has certainly not softened. Funding recovery risk is still very real. And the policy environment keeps moving. Level 7 restrictions, assessment reform mid-delivery, apprenticeships shifting from DFE to DWP. Those are new relationships, new priorities, and new institutional logic, all being absorbed without pausing the caseload. Put all of that together, and you get a unit economics problem. The cost of delivering a compliant quality apprenticeship is rising. The revenue for doing it is not. You simply cannot work harder. You cannot drop quality, and you cannot take on more compliance risk. The gap between what it costs to serve a learner well and what you're paid to do it is exactly why AI has moved from interesting to urgent for the sector. Not because it's exciting, but because the maths is starting to break. Before we get into AI, I want to name the problem precisely, because the strategy only makes sense once you're clear on what you're solving. Unit economics is simple. For every learner you serve, there's a cost and there's a return. When the cost rises faster than the return, which is exactly what has been happening, you have a unit economics problem. Every learner you take on, you're working harder for less margin than the year before. And you have almost no levers. You can't raise your prices, you can't cut corners on compliance, and you can't reduce the human contact that makes apprenticeships work. Because the moment you do, quality drops and the economics get worse, not better. So the question is, how do you change the equation without changing what makes this model trusted? AI isn't the answer to that question, but it's the thing that makes human work go further. Less time on administration, more time on coaching, and more time on the support that actually moves the learner forwards, elevating human impact. That's the job. Everything today is about how. Let me demystify AI in a minute or two, because vague thinking here leads to bad decisions. In practice, AI shows up in 3 main ways. Automation, repeatable administrative tasks that are rules-based. Workflow triggers, for example, reminders, routing. Most of you are already doing some of this. Augmentation, helping people draft, summarize, structure, or search. This is where large language models, the technology tools that sit behind things like ChatGPT, are useful for reducing the cognitive load on coaches and administrators. Classification. This is here for flagging risk, categorizing data, consistency checking, for more structured and more auditable approaches. The trap is jumping straight into classification or decision making because it sounds transformational before you've used AI to fix the simpler, higher volume problems first. The most important line on this slide: AI is a capability, not a strategy. A strategy starts with a problem you're solving and the outcome you need. AI is one of the tools that might help you get there. One more poll for you. It's actually an opportunity for you to give some free text here. So one word or phrase: what does your team currently spend the most time on that doesn't directly help with a learner? I fear we may be getting some common themes with admin. Good, interesting themes coming up here. We've got a lot of admin, interesting one around data mining, certainly getting data available and give you that foresight of what you need to do. Logging evidence, got a little bit of audit sprinkled in there. And unsurprisingly, compliance, which Slido has chosen to make yellow, that's very kind of it, is obviously also a risk at all times. I love that one. I shall dodge that one sideways, data in Aptem, but I do take the point, and we can certainly dig into some of that today. Excellent. So noticing something here, almost everything that just came up sort of relates back to administration in recording, drafting, chasing, or checking. Ultimately, that's the augmentation opportunity. The distinction that is most important and comes from a technical point of view in this whole session, I want to start with understanding augmentation and classification. And there are two real key differences here from a technology standpoint. Augmentation, that's typically relates to LLMs or large language models. They're probabilistic. Two identical prompts can produce two different outputs. And that's fine for augmentation. It's good for drafting review notes. It's good for summarizing evidence or suggesting feedback, because human reviews come at the output before it becomes the record. Variable output, but a human catches it. Classification and structured models are different. They're ultimately deterministic. You get the same answer given the same inputs. Consistent, explainable, and auditable. These are the right tools for structured judgment, such as marking, or flagging a learner at risk, or checking evidence completeness, or ILR accuracy. The practical rule here is that drafting and administration reduction is a really good thing for LLMs, and it's ultimately got human review built in by default. Structured judgment and risk flagging is ultimately a classification job with governance, and that ultimately leads to high stakes decisions requiring humans to decide always. The type of AI matters far more than the presence of AI. Anyone selling you a single AI solution for everything, coaching, compliance, progression decisions, doesn't understand the risk profile of the environment you're working in. In apprenticeships, responsible AI isn't a nice to have. It is the condition under which you're allowed to use AI at all, ultimately, because you operate in a funded, regulated, audited environment where the consequences of getting it wrong are real. This ladder has 3 levels. Level 1, decisions being made on assisting. So AI drafting or summarizing and ultimately suggesting has a human checking it before it becomes that record. This is where most of your AI should sit most of the time. So as you're deciding to use a tool, thinking about something in terms of whether it assists is a primary option to be transparently independent, because it allows for that human review. But at level 2, you're asking maybe AI to advise you on something. And this is where AI can flag, it can classify, and it can highlight risk. The human still decides what to do with that information, and it's appropriate for things that like learner risk indicators or evidence completeness checks with proper governance laid alongside. But the one that often a lot of people were either fearful of or excited about when it comes to AI and its involvement is that it could make decisions. Allowing something to get to level 3 of deciding allows AI to make that decision. And in most regulated delivery contexts, that just isn't appropriate. There may be a narrow, tightly constrained set of expectations, but they require explicit design and accountability so that you could actually consider using a decision-based model. The default position here should be that AI assists and advises, but humans always decide. And the bottom line, responsible AI in the sector needs auditability and accountability, not as bureaucracy. It's purely a professional discipline. So the thing we actually came for in terms of the title of this webinar today, I want to talk about the strategy. We've got the foundations. We understand what AI is and why the type matters. But what does responsible use look like in real terms when it comes to building out that strategy. And I want to be clear about what I mean by strategy. It's not a technology roadmap. It's not a vendor shortlist. It's a disciplined method for identifying where AI should go and what kind to use and how to know if it's working. So the first step here is we have to pop back to unit economics for a moment. The strategy method starts here with unit economics, not use cases. There are three lenses to look at things through here. First of all, cost to serve. Where does time and money actually go in your delivery model? Not where you think it goes, where it actually goes. The coach hours, the admin hours, rework, chasing. The risk to serve. Where do errors, inconsistencies, or gaps create compliance exposure? Where does the mistake cost you more than it should because the system amplifies it, the system that you operate? The quality to serve is the final one here, which is where does the learner experience suffer? Where does inconsistency across coaches or sites mean that one learner gets a better service than another? If an AI idea doesn't materially move on at least one of these three, it's noise. Not necessarily wrong, just not particularly strategic. There should always be a focus on friction, the specific operational points where your unit economics are breaking. That's where strategy points first. So step two in this overall approach is to build a friction backlog. Think of a friction backlog as a structured list of things that slow you or your people down. They create errors or steal time from learners. The work you'd want to fix even if AI didn't exist. Common ones that we hear all the time, we've seen a few of them given as examples today, are tutor admin overload, learner engagement gaps, off-the-job hours tracking and planning, and evidencing of completeness, potentially audit preparation, ILR accuracy, and assessment readiness. I think it's really important for us to look into which of these things are resonating most of all with you. What ultimately pains you or your organization most? We're going to head into another quick Slido poll now for the next 60 seconds or so. I just want you to pick the top two from the list that's presented to you. Which two friction areas are costing your organization the most time right now? Remember, you can select two, and I encourage you to do so. Of course, if anything is not listed here and you would like to highlight it, please feel free to put it in the Q&A section of our meeting today. I won't necessarily cover it as a question, but we can certainly talk about it as we get towards the end. Overwhelmingly, coach and tutor admin wins the race again. But interestingly, I suppose evidence completeness and audit prep is jumping up a little bit from where we discussed in our previous poll. Once you've identified what friction areas are important to you, the really important thing for you to then consider is a responsible AI position statement. So before you pilot anything, before you approve a new tool, before you run a trial, one-page responsible AI position statement can be really helpful. This is not a policy document. It's one page that ultimately answers 5 questions. Why are you using AI? i.e., what outcome are you actually trying to achieve? Where will you use it? And critically, and just as importantly, where won't you use it? Who remains accountable? Ultimately, not the AI system, not the vendor, a named person in your organization. And specifically into where you will not use it, make sure that as you're talking about that accountability, that you're talking about the explicit exclusions, the decisions that have been made. For example, learner progression decisions or safeguarding. Who owns the decision to make sure that that is not available? And finally, how outputs are governed. What must be reviewed by a human? What is okay to be reviewed by AI? What must be logged and what audit trail is required? This is one page written before you pilot anything. It prevents accidental overreach, gives your delivery teams more confidence, and gives you something that you could show to an offset inspector or a DWP auditor or a DFE auditor, depending on which particular person comes to call, if they ever ask. This is ultimately a decision-making guardrail. It's not a full policy yet. That might be something you progress into, but the minimum you would need before you start. Once you've made this into your thought pattern, we will actually be providing with you a downloadable template that will follow up after this session so that you can work through it and start to really think about this. The final thing, after you've got your friction backlog, you understand what your responsible use of AI might be, you can then start testing against that friction backlog whether each item on it is appropriate to use AI for. And ultimately, you can run this test. 5 questions again. Is it something that's high volume? AI ultimately earns its place on tasks that happen dozens or hundreds of times. A one-off problem isn't worth the design overhead that it would take to implement something. Is it something that's structured or pattern-based? The more recognizable the shape of a task, the more reliably AI can assist with it at time in and time out. Is it something that's reviewable by a human? If a human can check the output before the task becomes a matter of record, the risk drops dramatically. If this is something that you answer no to, it doesn't necessarily mean you can't use AI, but it means you need more governance and control around it. Is it a measurable outcome? Make sure you're defining the time that's been saved, the error rate, or a quality indicator before you pilot. If you can't measure it, you can't prove it worked. And finally, and probably most importantly, what's the consequence if it goes wrong? If AI is involved here, you need to know the risk. An incorrect note is correctable, or an incorrect review is correctable, but an incorrect funding submission is expensive. A design has to fit to the consequence. If you can't answer all 5 clearly, you're still in some problem definition, and you should probably go back to that friction backlog and sharpen the question. Bottom line here is that risk-based AI design is the way forwards. If something is low risk and high volume, AI-led is fine, by which I mean you could actually have AI taking that first step and then having the human come in afterwards. However, if something is high risk or high consequence, it should have a human-led approach. And even in a human-led approach, you can use AI tooling, but it ultimately is managed and contained by that human. The test tells you where each problem sits. Now, this is the part where most AI strategy conversations, they often end up skipping this. And that's systems thinking. Here's what I've seen happen. Ultimately, a provider identifies a real friction area. They run a suitability test. They design a sensible AI-assisted solution and they pilot it. 6 months later, though, it hasn't stuck because they treat it as a feature, not as a system change. Your apprenticeship delivery operation is ultimately a system. It has loops. Onboarding feeds into delivery, delivery feeds into pastoral care, and ultimately that feeds into ILR, and ultimately funding feeds into some sense of quality assurance, and finally will feed back into outcomes. If you change one part, even for the better, you change what people and processes around it need to do. If you don't design for those dependencies, the intervention ultimately degrades. So the question is never just, does this AI feature work? The question is, where does it sit in the system? What else must change around it for it to hold? The prompt on this slide ultimately is, how can you elevate human impact if AI intervenes? This is the design question. And ultimately, AI should free your people to do something of more high value, more human work. And if it doesn't, it's probably not solving the right problem. So we're kind of in the final stretch of today's session here, where I'm going to touch in here on sort of 3 truths that helps you anchor everything, and then a more of a concrete 90-day plan that you can take away and use. First of all, the 3 truths that should sit underneath everything you do in AI in this sector. You cannot grow margin simply by working harder. The unit economics problem is structural. Working harder is not a sustainable answer. Technology, used well with discipline, is part of the structural fix. In education, accountability is not negotiable. AI outputs that affect learners, progress decisions, evidence records, funding claims must have a named human accountable for them. That's no different whether you're using technology or not. The technology augments that human judgment. It does not replace it. AI must be used and applied proportionately to risk. The higher the consequence of a wrong output, the more human oversight you need. And it's a sliding scale. It's not Boolean. It's not one way or the other. Don't let urgency or vendor pressure push you to take the risk ladder and head up that risk ladder faster than your governance can support it. This is not meant to scare you. What we will lay out here and what you'll get in the follow-up to this is a really clear plan in how you can do this and how you can do it quickly. But these three truths are guardrails. They're not there to slow you down. They're there to make AI safe to scale. And scaling is ultimately where you'll get the benefit of AI. So I guess the 90-day challenge, and I'm calling this a challenge rather than a plan, because a plan sits in a document and often doesn't go much further beyond it. A challenge demands that something actually happens. So days 1 to 30 from now, create the conditions, identify those top 5 friction points, score them using a stability test, and draft that 1-page responsible AI position statement. You don't need to be testing tools or implementing new ones or starting that vendor conversation at this point. What are the real problems for which AI is suitable? And what are my boundaries? Days 31 to 60, run 1 contained pilot with 1 use case. The highest scoring on your suitability test is probably the best one to look at. Human in the loop must be by design. Make sure that you keep a human in the loop at all times, even if ultimately you intend to remove that human from the loop because your risk tolerance supports it. Measure 3 things before you start. A lot of people forget to baseline. Start with the amount of time that's currently being spent, what errors currently exist, and what your quality signals are today, and then remeasure those as you progress through that pilot in the time you've saved, any errors reduced, and ultimately the quality signal directions you're getting. Finally, take any one of those things that you're going to pilot. You can repilot, introduce new pilots, but quite quickly you're going to want to scale what proves value and stop what doesn't. This is the idea behind saying that there's 30 days to pilot something in. Quite often, pilots will run 2, 3, 4 months or even longer. And in some cases, that is absolutely required to see the output result. But what you should be getting before that is some signals to understand whether or not it moved that cost to serve, whether or not it moved that risk to serve, or whether or not it removed that quality to serve. And if the answer is yes, and you're happy, formalize it and build the governance around it. I refer back to the idea of a policy statement. It's not a policy, it's for a responsible use of AI. Perhaps you then need to delve into an actual full-blown policy around it. Ultimately, you're defining the no-go zones. And if no, diagnose why. Take one step back, not back to zero. I've built a downloadable one-pager of this plan, which goes into a bit more detail alongside the other assets that I've mentioned today, which is your template that's available to you. Whenever you're considering this, and as a key takeaway for today that I'd like you to consider is, when you remove the word AI from your strategy, does it still improve cost, quality, or risk? Almost everything that you'd seek to solve with AI is a problem that already exists. It's something that without AI, you'd want to solve anyway. So if you can remove AI from that statement, you are probably solving a real problem, and AI is your accelerator. It's your partner. That's the test, ultimately. Hold everything to it. I'm very happy now to move over to 15 minutes or so of questions. If anybody has any burning questions, please put them into the chat and we can head on forwards. If there are no questions, of course, happy for you to follow those up directly with your representative, but I will pause here and see if there's any questions coming in. Right. Looks like we may not have too many questions today, which is absolutely fine. So I have a final call to action for you. This is ultimately the first in a series of sessions. We've gone quite quickly through a lot of these topics, and we of course would love to delve into more detail with them. The next webinar is already scheduled. It's coming up on Thursday, the 23rd of April. Will take place at 11 a.m. This will be a plain English guide to AI capabilities for apprenticeship delivery. So we talked a little bit today about types of AI and where they can be used. We'll delve more into that and talk about some more specific use cases about what particular tools work in which particular way. And yes, I am here representing Aptem, but that doesn't mean that your entirety of your answer is answered by Aptem at all cases. We will delve in and go a little bit further. The QR code on screen will take you to the registration page. Please get your phones out, scan that and register. And I hope that you have enjoyed your time with me today. We will be following up with some assets for you to use. If there are any questions relating to that, please do get in touch with Aptem. But thank you so much for giving me your time and attention today. It's been lovely being with you.